Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back to Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle. I'm your host once again. Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bells, leave a comment if you want to comment. Go to our About section. You'll find represent.com, our shirts, Dutch Hunter Rendezvous, Legend of the Superstition Mountains, black, gray, long sleeve, short sleeve. Additionally, go to one word, one big group together word, legendofthesuperstitionmountains.com, and you'll find our website there, and mugs, hats, and some other stuff. So please kind of jump in. We're keeping all the costs down as much as we can. We're not trying to keep an inventory. We're just trying to get it out there so anybody wants them. Mugs look awesome. Hats, we're getting better and better hats as we go. But that being said and done, we can get right into today's topic. This is something Trevor's been bugging me for a month or two. And one of the problems with telling this story is there's so many sidebars and so many different ways to go with it. It literally could be a Chasing Legends for every separate story. So I'll cover some of the sidebar stories a bit and kind of cover the overall thing. And what we're going to talk about today is the Jones-Piper feud. And in kind of a way, we'll talk about Maria Jones, who was well known. For a lot of people, Maria Jones, Celeste Ava Jones, came to Arizona sometime before 1949. She was originally possibly from Texas, but she'd come out of California. She'd been part of a church group and wanted that group to invest and said she could help the church by finding this treasure. So they financed her to make this trip to the Superstitions. Some people get it confused with what Julia Thomas and Albert Schaefer did. I think that's just simply because Maria Celeste Ava Jones was black. Julia Thomas was a quadroon. She never had any children with Emil Thomas or Albert Schaefer. And the Schaefer-Thomas connection was more kind of an apocalyptic, kind of non-denominational, messianic thing. He was Roman Catholic, she was Jewish. They incorporated so many odd elements into it. I've never been able to really tell. There's a lot of people that kind of throw this and that, like, oh, they were out in Morristown with their cult group, which was none of that was true. They had this group, they had this thing that went for a while, and then it just kind of, while they still had a belief system in it, it kind of phased itself out. In the end, I did the video, I think, where it's Albert and his partner John Beggs were out by the Hassayampa River and mining out there and doing some farming, and then they passed away. This is about a few years after. Right after Julia had passed away, he sold the house and they moved out there, and a few years later John Beggs died. Albert buries him on the hill, and that's it. But I don't think the two are related. I've never found anything. I think it's pure speculation. But there is an unusual aspect to Julia's thing, because Julia comes out, her first claims are in 49. She's quite early in there. We don't hear initially if anybody has any problems with her. In fact, both with Jones and Piper, their camps, people went through their camps. Tom Collenborn, Bob Corbin, Clay, people went through their camps. In fact, everybody in that area packed in, usually through First Water. So they would come in different groups, but there's plenty of times they were on the trails together and there were no problems. So it's kind of odd. These two butted heads unlike anyone else in the mountains. And I know for a fact, Chuck Ayler, Al Reeser, so many people ran across them in the mountains and seemed to think, well, she was a little different and Ed Piper was a nice guy. But the two of them certainly butt heads. And I'll hit why that was. There's this interesting aspect to Celeste. And what it is she was after Jesuit or Incan gold. She thought Weaver's Needle was hollow, and there were passageways and openings that you could go into to get inside Weaver's Needle and work through it, and there was caves of gold bars and stuff. So that was her theory. Now this is 1949. There is no Travis Tumlinson. He's probably at that time carving up the stone maps. There is none of these other people. You don't hear this theory a lot. That was her theory when Bob Ward runs across her. That's her theory, and we'll get to Bob Ward's story with her. What's odd and unusual is if you take out the idea of Arizona, the Superstition Mountains, and tell her story, you'd swear she was at Victoria Peak. Everything about her story, what she's talking about, everything sounds like Victoria Peak. And I always wonder if somewhere along the way, Doc Noss or some of these stories from Victoria Peak in the early 40s, she'd got across some of this and she got the two things confused because she never seemed to be looking for the Lost Dutchman. It was always the Jesuit treasure and the Incan treasures and things like that. And it's the people inside the needle. It's these passageways and these different things, and it's hollow. And if you think about it for a moment, go back, look at our video on Victoria Peak. She's describing Victoria Peak to a degree. But anyways, so a number of people run into her. Tom Collenborn ran into her during his early days cowboying, and he said she offered him a job. She also said when she found the treasure, she'd pay for his college. But people seem to think she was a nice enough lady, a little out there. She would sing arias, which is opera arias, and she had a voice. She always had a crew down there, and they were down kind of more southwest in the area of Pinyon Camp. And they would move around, and she was in on the mountains. She'd leave the mountains for a little bit and get some people to stake her again. She'd come in searching for the treasure. And always going up and down Weaver's Needle. They were putting up rope ladders and stuff all over it, trying to climb and find these passageways. Again, like I said, no one ever brings it up to me, and no one's ever brought it to me, but I always thought Victoria Peak. Well, Celeste Jones is in the mountains, and after about 5 or 6 years, Ed Piper shows up and establishes his first camp probably about 1956. So Piper comes in 56. Maria's already been in there since 49 or earlier. She's been there off and on all this time, had a number of people work for her. And Ed Piper comes in, and what I think happened was they had to travel, they had to run into each other, but Ed Piper had Piper Spring, and he had the only water source in the mountains. So I think the Jones group would have to go in and around Piper's group. Because everyone would say, Celeste Jones, you come into her camp, she was very friendly, she'd always offer you something to eat, everything else, cup of coffee. Ed Piper, the same, great host. But they had this thing. So I think it was Celeste Jones people going to get coon, get water. And I'm sure words were said or something was said, and the people that worked for Piper and Jones created this problem. Maybe Ed Piper and Celeste Jones started a little of it. But what I do know is Ed Piper's people, their stuff would go missing or there'd be problems in his camp. And his guy said, well, you know, Jones group came through here earlier. I'm sure they went through our stuff and stole it. Now, whether that's true or not, Celeste Jones always denied it, said she had nothing to do with that. So Ed Piper's crew starts telling Ed Piper, hey, you know, Celeste Jones' crew came through here, and they probably went through our stuff and stole our stuff. And I think Ed got that and thought they had to have done it because his guys told him that, went to Celeste Jones and said, we never did that. And she asked her guys, and then it just started. I think they might have had a dislike for each other. They were in the same area. He didn't like them going by his camp when he wasn't there. But I think that built up. And that's starting in 56, 57. Well, finally, in 1958, Amos Hawkins has to come in and retrieve all the arms because over the last year or so, they're taking pot shots at each other's camps. Now, some of this is established in a gentleman's book. The gentleman was known as Robert Sikorsky. He wrote a first book, Fool's Gold, but the identical book is also called Quest for the Dutchman's Gold, and a lot of it's about his time because he worked with Celeste Jones and kind of what was going on in there. And when you get his thing, he says she was a bit off the wall, but he never says anything like she was an awful person or anything like that. And I've never gotten that from anyone. They would say, you know, she had a hinge loose, but she was a nice lady. She was loud, she was this, she was dramatic, but she was a nice lady. So we get this kind of thing where Ed Piper gets also, a lot of people say Ed Piper was a really good guy. He was, you know, he was always good about stuff, always welcomed people into his camp. Well, they started this feud and started building this thing up, and they're taking pot shots in and out of the camp. And I think Sikorsky talks about a little bit where they would just literally shoot at each other's camp on occasion. And they would just sit there as bullets went by. And they're so lucky that no one got killed during that time from either side. Because it's just like they would randomly get up and decide to fire some shots across at the other camp, and then the other camp would fire back over a mile or so away, back towards that camp. Now, I'm believing it's the people working for the people, and this whole thing is just kind of getting out of hand. So Amos Hawkins comes in. He just takes everybody's guns away, try to settle it. If they can't shoot it, let them beat each other with sticks, and that's so be it. So all this goes on. Well, a number of people are going through these camps. They're hiring different people. Some of these people are not the on the most up on the up people. I have a huge file of documents concerning Ed Piper and a lot of the people he worked for them, and a lot of them were in and out of jail and things going on. Not saying Ed Piper's a bad guy, but that seemed to be that element that would work for people. And they went through a lot of different people. And there's one point, Maria Jones hires this guy, and he goes in the mountains, and he's going down the trail, and he runs into Ed Piper. Now, his name is, I believe it was Robert Crandall, and he's going down the trail, and I have the inquest papers during the court testimony, and he drew on Piper. And Piper was known to be a hell of a shot and a fast draw, but Crandall drew on him. I think, it might not have been Bob Crandall. Robert St. Marie. I'm sorry. Let me back. Robert St. Marie. Bob Crandall did not shoot him. He was a photographer, I think, or a helicopter pilot. Sorry, Bob. So anyways, got that wrong. Robert St. Marie draws on Piper. Piper says that the gun misfired or jammed. And because of that, Piper had been in the motion drawing, drew, and then fired and shot him and killed him. He stayed with him, realized he wasn't going to make it, then went to get help after he realized he passed away. And it's all in the testimony. Piper basically said, he had me dead to rights. If the gun hadn't jammed, I'd be the one dead. He would be the one sitting here. So it wasn't like a big showdown, whatnot. And for whatever reason, St. Marie just decided to pull the gun. Piper and a lot of people believe that Maria Jones had hired him to basically assassinate Piper. And it's hard to say at this point because of how things got out so out of hand. This seems to be the big culmination of everything in '59. And they continued to feud and off and on, and Maria's in and out of the mountains. Now, during this period of time, Bob Ward's going through Maria's camp. And Bob goes through, and Maria says, hey, can you come back next week? I need some help with stuff if you got some time. Bob said, yeah. Now, you got to remember, Bob been back in there since sometime in the, that period of the late 50s. So Bob comes back. She says, hey, I need you to just go out with us. We got some stuff. We're going to haul some stuff up into the mountains we got to deal with, but you just watch our trail. And that was Bob's whole thing, was he said, I didn't do anything. They were trying to get a burro to haul everything, but they couldn't get a hold of the burros. There was a couple loose burros that they would use for transport or packing, and they couldn't find the burro when they needed it. So her and a guy, Louie, who worked for Celeste Jones, go out and they dig up back in, I think it's East Boulder Canyon, these duffel bags. And they're really heavy, and each one of them grabs one of these duffel bags and starts lugging it along. And they lug and lug and lug and go down the trail. Now, we know where they went because enough people talked to Bob Ward about it, and he told a lot of people where the general area was. It was out by Coffee Flat. They went up Coffee Flat, kind of on the west side, kind of a little bit southwest side, and went up through there. And there's a lot of information I've seen out there. I've found in folders and files and stuff. I thought it wasn't well known, but then I found out a lot of people knew about it. And Ward said, we went up there, and he talks the description of the book. They went up to a certain point. They camped a couple days as they hauled this stuff, which was very heavy. They got to one point, and he said they told him to wait here and keep an eye on the back trail while they kind of buried this stuff. They went up, and Bob said they went within a couple hundred yards, and he could see what they were doing, and they were pulling these crosses out of this duffel bag, and they looked gold. And people told me that Ward said privately he wasn't sure if they're lead and they painted them gold or what it was, but they were very heavy, and they were all kinds of different shapes and sizes. He said they were like rolled dough. Even though he said they were 200 yards, he actually got a good view of them. So I think he came in, he wandered over to see what was going on. And he said he had a pretty good idea, but they buried, and there was probably about somewhere between 15 and 20 of them. Now, one of them was supposedly 4 feet, a 4-foot gold cross. I don't know if me and Trevor could carry that around. So I don't know if they'd really be gold. And I think that's why Ward did say, this is the shapes and sizes, but they could have been lead or something else, because I think he was having a hard time believing that this could have been all solid gold. But he was very impressed, whatever it was, and that there were all these crosses, and they buried them up there. He said they knew I had to be able to see where they were at. They put a big X on a boulder, and then they came down out of there, and then they went back, and nothing was ever said. Bob Ward said he let a lot of people know, and I've talked to several people that did talk to him and told him that, and he told them the information. And they said they didn't know if Ward really ever went back to relocate it. He kind of just let it be. Maybe he figured they'd went back up, dug it up, and moved it to another location. No one else has ever found the boulders or the X marked on the boulders. I went up and kind of did a look-see in the area, kind of thought where I thought it looked like it fit and didn't find anything marked on a boulder. Who knows how lightly they could have scraped it. So that was Bob Ward's meeting with Celeste Jones. Well, a number of different people, like I said, Tom Collenborn and Bob Corbin, a lot of people hung out in her camp. In 1962, Ed Piper starts feeling really sick. And he's having all kinds of problems with his stomach and stuff, and it turns out he's basically deathly ill. They bring him into town, Ed Piper passes away. What's very odd about this, in some instances, is that seems to just take all the wind out of Celeste Jones. For some reason, once Piper's gone, even though this feud has only lasted like, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, it's literally once Ed Piper's gone, even though it's unrelated, he's not looking for the same treasure, Celeste Jones is like, kind of doesn't know what to do with herself. She's still hiring people. She hires a young man named Vance Bacon, and I'm trying to remember the other man's name, and I'm going to have to cheat here. Gatewood, Ray Gatewood. And she hires them to climb the needle. Like I said earlier, they have all these rope ladders and stuff all over Weaver's Needle. There's remains of them. You can actually go out there with binoculars and stuff and see some of the remains of some of this stuff hanging on the mountain. And I've seen some of them. And it's scary and sketchy. Well, anyways, they were up on the top, and they were going to rappel or work some ropes and work down and look at another section. There was a spot that Celeste Jones wanted them to look at, drop down to. The gentleman's a geologist and all this, so he takes it. And she obviously paid. However she got funded, she paid, and it seemed like she must have always paid everyone that worked for her, because she was always able to get people and a number of educated people and all. Anyways, this is in 1963 in March. It's the spring of 63, and they go up there, and Gatewood's doing something, and he hears rocks and stuff, and he starts hearing screaming, and Vance Bacon goes off the edge of Weaver's Needle and falls 500 feet. During the 500 feet, he screams the entire way down. Joe Reuter and another guy, and I can't remember what his name is, but Joe Reuter and another guy are back in the mountains some distance away, and they hear the screams. And they realize someone has fallen, something's happened over, and they know about where it's at. They kind of run over that way and then head out to let the sheriff's department know. Because the other problem is Gatewood now is stranded up on top of Weaver's Needle, and basically Vance Bacon is dead somewhere in the rocks there. So they head out. Well, in the meantime, Niall Leatham and Clay Worster in the area, they hear the commotion. As soon as they get out of the mountains, they hear what happened and go right back in the mountains. Clay talked to me a number of times about the story, and I actually have video of him years ago talking to me about it. I'll have to find sometime. Where him and Niall Leatham went back in. Niall stayed at the base, kind of looking for the body. He did locate where the body was, where it had fallen, where it landed, to direct the search and rescue group in to recover the body. Clay climbed Weaver's Needle and got up to Gatewood and spent time with him. And Clay said the guy was literally just falling apart. This guy he was with had fallen and just everything, and then he was stranded up there by himself. He said the guy was just completely shattered. They brought a helicopter in, I believe, and they were able to pick them up off the needle and fly off. And I think Clay said someone took some shots at them when they were leaving. They don't know who that was and what the purpose was. He didn't believe anybody shot Vance Bacon, and he wasn't so sure about other people's versions of that story. But he said they did get them off the mountain and take them down, Vance Bacon, and he had died. This is March of 63. By December 63, Jones is gone. Who knows how much weight that had of this gentleman falling after Robert St. Marie, but Vance Bacon falling to his death. He left a wife and several children. And it might have just been enough for Celeste Jones. There's no Ed Piper. She's not getting anywhere. She's not found any treasure. If she's found treasure, who knows? Maybe whatever her and Louis buried or something, whatever was going on with that. But December 63, she's gone. And the rumors came out she was in an insane asylum. She was this. It appears from everyone I've ever talked to, and there's about 4 or 5 different people, she ended up just going back to California, where she lived the rest of her life. I don't think she's still alive today, but she was alive within 10 years ago. And she just the rest of her life. A lot of people, there were very few people that contacted her. Some people stayed in touch with her. There was no reason for her to be disturbed. I think was basically most people's insight. I think it was like she didn't have anything to offer other than these stories. And if she was kind of beyond this, maybe it was best to let it be. Other than what she was talking about. The only thing I would have been curious is to ask her is like, this is the Victoria's Peak story. It's very similar to what you talked about. Is there any way you could have got these two mixed up or something? Or where did you hear this? Who told you? I'd like to know a little of that, because it seems a bit odd that, like I said, prior to everybody's Jesuit and all these treasure hunts, Celeste Jones was in there doing that before anyone else. Once Tomlinson came out with the Peralta Stone maps and that whole thing started winding out, then you had the Jesuit guys and all these people. For that, there were the Two Soldiers Mine, there was the Apache Treasure Caves, there was the Lost Dutchman Mine, the French Soldiers Cave. There were these different stories. But you don't run into these Jesuit hunters up in the mountains. She was like one of the first ones to go in there and do that. And I also wonder if Tomlinson had any connection or ended up running into her during his early time of coming through the mountains. So that's kind of the story. I mean, by that point, 63, she's gone. And as the next era comes and approaches and the people start coming to the mountains, their camps are gone. When I first started going to the mountains, it was a memory, but a lot of people had known them and run through their camps and talked about it because it was such a huge deal. Al Morrow had talked about it quite a bit because he'd tried to play peacemaker between the two groups, because he was kind of Needle Canyon, but kind of caught the crossfire between the two groups at times, hearing the gunshots and a lot of what went on. I read a number, Al Morrow would write down everything that happened each and every day, which is a lot of people do, keep journals and diaries. And in Al Morrow's journals and diaries, he would heard 3 gunshots a day at 12 noon, heard 2 more gunshots at 5 p.m. just after I finished dinner. He would keep track of the gunshots and different things that happened day to day. So it was a feud. Unfortunately, 2 people died. One obviously in harm's way with Robert St. Marie. The other was just tragic, Vance Bacon falling off a weaver's needle. I think in the serious overview of all things between Ed Piper and Celeste Jones, it's probably safe to say that was probably the best case scenario. But whether it was water rights or just some mutual early dislike, something set on a trail packing in, something happened that triggered the two of them, and that was that for the rest of the time they were in the mountains. And there were a lot of things people said that you can't necessarily say today about both people. I've went through extensively the court issues and a number of things with Ed Piper, and he was who he was. With Celeste Jones, again, the people that knew her would tell me stories, but then they would also say, she wasn't really that bad. And so I get it that they were back in there. I think always we have to take our hat off to Celeste Jones, being a woman running work crews in the mountains for those long periods of time, especially in the late 40s and early 50s up into the 60s. She's definitely probably one of the more, well, not a Dutch hunter true to the extent. She was obviously very important back in there, and the stories between her and Ed Piper helped definitely fuel up the 50s going into the 60s and keep that going. So there you go, kind of nice overview. We'll touch upon, if I find the interview with Clay and it was a really nice one. We did actually in the Superstitions. So you got the backdrop of the Superstitions, and it was just a conversation. I just recorded the conversation as we were talking. It's an excellent conversation. And there's other sidebar stories that go along with Celeste Jones. But definitely, if you get a chance, pick up Sikorsky's book. Quest for the Peralta Gold is pretty easy to find. Ward's Ripple of Lost Echoes. We always have boxes of those laying around. We've been giving them away for years. I think we've given away a couple hundred over the last year or two. So if you come out to the Rendezvous or something, we've always been handing those out and trying to just get them out there in circulation. Some of the great stories that Bob Ward told. But there were a lot of people, and I believe Bob Corbin might be one of the last people that knew Celeste Jones that's alive today, because most everybody's gone now. But like I said, I've always heard stories about each of them, but no one ever made it felt like they were threatened or would turn down a meal or a cup of coffee in their camp. So it kind of goes a long way that it was just a mutual thing, and that does happen with people. So kind of that's your overview of Celeste Maria Ava Jones and Edgar Piper, and I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, I hope you really kind of enjoy some of the storytelling, some of the aspects there. It's kind of an interesting thing. You get a book, pop a book, look at it. It's to this day, two things always bug me: is what was it that triggered the two of them, because they cross paths all the time, packing in and out. Everyone packed in First Water because they did not like to come up the Peralta Trailhead and up through Old Willow Canyon and through Fremont Saddle. They preferred to go through First Water, which Bill Barkley always talked about. Is Ed Piper, Celeste, all of them came through, and they would come in one after the other at the same times and go through. And he never seemed to have many problems with them there. So I would think that it was kind of once they were ensconced in camp that all those problems really triggered. But that being said and done, I hope you enjoyed everything there. I hope everybody has a wonderful and great week. I hope everybody takes care. Check out the website, Legend of the Superstition Mountains, one long word, then you go .com, and you'll catch stuff there. We're getting the bibliography built up where you can find books, and not just what we recommend, books available out there and so forth. Different stuff like that. Remember, the Rendezvous is coming up. I believe it's the 4th, 5th, and 6th of November. So it'll be Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the Don's Camp. You can check out the videos in the YouTube to see where the Don's Camp is and kind of that stuff, because we have a tutorial one of how to get out there and everything. But we don't know how everything will go, but Jesse James Feldman, the author of Dutchman's Trail, will be our guest speaker that night. We'll have a lot of other things going on. We're looking at bringing the chili back, because people are starting to say, well, bring the chili back. I'm thinking, if you want the chili so bad, bring a pot and make some chili. But we're kind of looking at a couple other things, and since the weather should be nice, I'm hoping the weather will be really nice at that time, we're looking at a couple other activities to do. So I hope to see everybody there. If not there, see everybody here. See you at the lives on Fridays. This week we hope, and we're planning on myself and Eric Deleel. So hopefully Eric will be joining us on a split screen. You guys, he may not see the questions, but I'll be able to ask them to him. We'll have Eric live with us on the live telecast on Friday. Until the next time, sunglasses by way of Frank, because he says I look good in them and I look awesome or something like that, and I don't know. He says, you look really good with the sunglasses. Keep them. So I kept them again for another week. Anyways, got the sunglasses, but that still means I'm Wayne Tuttle and you're not. And until the next time, take care. This was Chasing Legends.